Formed in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, the Cribs are a band of brothers. Twins Gary and Ryan Jarman on the guitar and bass, accompanied by their younger brother Ross on the drums, are part of a family three-piece that became one of the defining acts of the noughties NME crowd, alongside contemporaries the Libertines, Kaiser Chiefs, Bloc Party and more. Their 2-decade-long career has seen some major achievements. Q magazine have named them the biggest cult band of the UK, the Evening Standard have named them one of the 20 best indie rock bands of all time. They even managed to recruit guitar legend Johnny Marr of the Smiths as a full-time member between 2008 and 2011. They're serious business, crafting surprisingly detailed tunes between the use of just guitar, drums and bass, and are considered one of the iconic acts of the noughties UK indie scene. The Cribs arguably had a perfect 3-album run, from the melancholy introspection of their self-titled debut, to the angrier, energy-filled The New Fellas, and to the polished, infectious men's needs, women's needs, whatever. Their lo-fi take on the garage indie rock landscape created some absolute classics. The three Jarmans started playing as the Cribs in 2001. They went from jamming the Ramones songs in their bedroom in Wakefield in the 90s to being hunted down by record labels in a frenzy to sign guitar bands in the wake of the White Stripes and the Strokes. They signed with Wichita initially. Ryan was living in Chicago at the time and decided to move home to pursue music with his brothers, and the Jarmans began recording in 2003 in Toe Rag Studios in Hackney. The Cribs' self-titled debut took just 1 week to record, as the songs were all written and completed a year and a half prior. They had to wait for Ross to turn 18 before finalising recording contracts, and as such, the album released in 2004. The Cribs' first record firmly established their unique take on the scene around them, stripped back and rough around the edges while remaining catchy, hooky and memorable. This can be seen on songs like You Were Always the One, laying down the archetype of the Cribs, melancholic melodies, stripped back guitar and bass dancing around one another, punchy drums, harmony vocals and lovesick lyrics. The track with the most plays from this album on Spotify is Another Number. Another genius use of the three-piece format, using a guitar motif that is repeated throughout with bass notes outlining the chord progression, accompanied by simple punchy drum beat and more lonely lyrics about being unnoticed and unsure of who you even are. I'm alone, I'm cold, just another number on another road. In 2022, the band released remasters of their first 3 records, partly because they had regained rights to their masters after a bit of a legal battle. The self-titled album reached number 23 in the UK album charts 20 years after its initial release. The Cribs is an electrifying debut that lays the foundation for the band's future successes. This album introduces the Cribs as a band with a distinct voice and a penchant for crafting infectious, raw and honest indie rock. With a mix of spirited anthems and introspective moments, the album encapsulates the trials and tribulations of youth, making it a compelling and enduring entry into the indie rock canon. The New Fellas is far and away my favourite Cribs record. It's raw and lo-fi like the previous album, but more energetic and in your face with more distorted guitars, super present bass, and drums like you're getting hit by Mike Tyson. The lyrical content shifts from lovesick, sorrowful lyrics to more socially focused, mostly about the disgust about the behaviour of the bands and their followers around them at the time. When interviewed for Noughties indie podcast 22 Gram Pod, Gary says this about the New Fellas.
On the New Fellas, we were definitely more upfront about our feelings because we were just pretty frustrated and kicking out against stuff on the second record.
Album opener, Hey Scenesters, named one of the greatest indie anthems ever by the NME in 2005. It's pretty on the nose. Just straight up calling out those who were following the NME scene with no real appreciation for the music, i.e. Scenesters. Once again, the Cribs are making the best of their 3-piece format, filling the soundscape with call and response vocals, a shout-along chorus, and angular drums that would sit well on a Bloc Party album. Ross has said that the song was inspired by playing a show at Brixton Windmill, which was full of kids who were only there because they thought it made them look cool. Among the rages on the record were some slower takes, with a bit more introspection. Songs like It's Only Love details the aftermath of a failed relationship, and The Wrong Way to Be explores self-doubt and the pressures of conforming to social norms while seeking self-acceptance. Yet, despite these points of respite, the project as a whole is much more aggressive, in-your-face and angry than the previous. A lot less crying about lost love, and more being pissed off about the deterioration of the scene surrounding them. They weren't wrong about it either. They inadvertently predicted the advent of terms like landfill indie and the dismissal of the entire genre. But that's a rabbit hole for another day. The NME placed the New Fellas at number 11 on their Album of the Year list 2005. In 2009, Q Magazine named it as one of their albums of the century. In 2015, it was inducted into the DIY Hall of Fame and was certified silver by the BPI in 2017, 12 years after release. It reviewed well at the time too. 8 out of 10 from the NME, 8 out of 10 from Drowned in Sound, and AllMusic gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Quote, "Almost every song is lodged firmly in the red, with the brothers pushing their vocals to the limits while they hit the strings and skins like they were taking out some long overdue revenge." And now for the big one. Men's Needs, Women's Needs, Whatever is the Cribs' biggest album to date. After the success of the previous album, the band signed a major record label contract with Warner Brothers out across the pond, and as such flew out to Vancouver to record. In an interview with Yorkshire Evening Post, Gary reflects on this gear shift in the process. Quote, "The Warner Brothers deal just upped the ante a lot. Bigger budgets, loftier expectations. I remember arriving at the studio in Vancouver to begin tracking the album, and the scale of the operation was just so markedly different. All of our gear had been shipped to the other side of the world, there were people unpacking it and setting it up for us, tons of different Warner's people coming in and out to meet us and schmooze. It was hard to ignore that things had changed on that front at least." Alex Kapranos from Franz Ferdinand produced the record. The band looked up to Alex as he was enjoying success with Franz while avoiding selling out, so the band saw him as a perfect fit to steer them in the right direction. Alex pushed for more layers to the songs, taking more time on each take. As a result, Man's Needs, Women's Needs, Whatever feels more polished, professional and deliberate, with the band experimenting more when compared to the previous two projects. This is encapsulated perfectly with track 10, Be Safe, a fan favourite track that creates a wall of sound-like effect with huge booming bass swallowing the track, layered guitars with modulation effects on, and a helpless wailing of a repeated refrain. All this to create a backdrop to showcase spoken word poetry by Lee Ronaldo of Sonic Youth fame. To compare such a deep, dark song packed with emotion and dread to something like Hey Scenesters, you can clearly see there is an evolution here. The band are maturing. They're keeping the signature of what makes the Cribs, i.e. shouty, harmonised vocals, present drumming, etc., but becoming so much more. Through the album, the band visits lots of different ideas. Songs like Our Bovine Public kicks off the album, in a similar vein to the previous record, an aggressive put down on the scene they felt alien to by this point in the band's history. Then a track like I'm a Realist, delving into the thoughts of indecision in a romantic context, singing No One Will Ever Do For You in the bridge. I've Tried Everything, about craving more in life, with references to Wakefield with The Merry City and how they're bored of their hometown, yet feeling hopeless as even moving somewhere completely new like Brighton didn't seem to solve anything. However, the standout track is without a doubt the Cribs' biggest song, Man's Needs. It's described by Genius as a tale of a relationship that is based on the need for normality, although it's hard to narrow down exactly what the lyrics mean, but there's clear themes throughout. Gender roles, relationships, the status quo, all shouted by the Jarmans as they alternate between verse and chorus, bouncing around an angular drum pattern and guitar riff that will burrow its way into your memory for weeks. The song balances mature emotional lyricism with being a fun indie banger amazingly well, and was a regular track heard on indie discos across the UK back in the day. Complete with a Not Safe for Work music video, Men's Needs remains one of the Cribs' signature tracks, and its success has no doubt contributed to the band's continued popularity and cult status. Cribs obviously hit it massive with Men's Needs. Nominated for Single and Album of the Year at the NME Awards 2007, was one of the Rolling Stones Tracks of the Year in 2007, peaking at number 12 on the album charts and number 1 during their reissues in 2022. I think it's safe to say they hit the jackpot with this album. Following on from Men's Needs, the band released Ignore the Ignorant in September 2009, their first album to feature their newest member, legendary guitarist for the Smiths, Johnny Marr. After meeting Marr in a bar in Portland, Oregon, he became a full-time member of the group until his departure in April 2011. Marr's time in the band would see the Cribs play shows alongside other iconic noughties acts, including the Arctic Monkeys and Franz Ferdinand, and enjoy commercial success for Ignore the Ignorant, being their first top 10 album. Their next project following Mars' departure was In the Belly of the Brazen Bull, released in May 2012 and also achieving top 10 success. A compilation album and another 3 commercially successful albums were to follow, alongside world tours and appearances at numerous festivals, including Reading, Isle of Wight and Glastonbury. While their following projects have all managed to peak higher in the UK album charts, none quite have the staying power and nostalgia associated with them like the first 3 releases do. The Cribs have, throughout their career, proven to us and themselves that they need not follow the in crowd. By being themselves, sticking to their guns and doing what they felt was right, they've managed to survive landfill indie, becoming something beyond the reductive label, and inspiring young talent in bands like Soup, Courting and Shame, just to name a few. These 3 brothers from Wakefield have become something so much more than the sum of its parts, and it's obvious to see why their success has lasted this long.